Hi, Evian. No surprises, but Evian's moving here from San Francisco. So, Evian, you're larger than life in the room here. So we've got you full screen. So, welcome to Melbourne. Evian's had just the most incredible influence, I guess, on myself, which has seeped into the organisation of CI. And we have a operating manual at CI called the CI. We can't give it to you. It's a secret source of what we do around here, but it's called the CI Way. And embedded in this book is just so much of Evian's influence. So I want to thank you, Evian, and Evian's kindly reviewed this book and said it's just not good enough. We need to do 2.0. So we'll be back on that one next year, Evian. Evian's life started back in South Africa, and I won't dwell too much on it because there's a couple of questions I want to put to you, Evian, in the interview. But clearly a genius. Started off as a PhD in cardiology and completed that, and then decided to switch his focus to the topic of the brain. So it was, if you like, a journey from the heart to the brain or the head, and Evian then moved to Australia, established this Brain Dynamics Centre, then moved to San Francisco to commercialise that piece of research. But why is the brain important to us? Well, I'm going to let Evian sort of go into detail on that question, but it's really, really important because it affects every decision we make in our lives. It affects our relationships, and particularly the relationship with self. And it really, in a way, is the kind of the topic of science and psychology, science and spirituality, science and philosophy. It's the anchoring evidence bit that really determines our well-being, our connection to purpose, and really is the foundation, or one of the big pillars of what actually makes us a human and what makes a good life out of a human. So you could not think of a more pressing topic. The actual art, if you like, of investing is a sub-component of that, but clearly we make decisions under stress in this place all the time, and it never goes away. So, managing that is very, very much centered around the brain function. Over to you, Evian.
Well, firstly, thanks, Pete, and thanks to you all for joining us on this little discussion today. I do want to start by saying that working with Pete and with the CI Way has been such a great privilege. Pete, in his usual understated, humble way, always kind of diminishes what he's created, but it genuinely is an institution that is very important in the landscape of the mind in value latency decision making. And we'll be doing a podcast, Pete and I and Dave Daglio, on money brain. But it is a serious enterprise of big data, big thinking, and of course the outcomes speak for themselves. But it is relevant to a segue to what I'd like to share with you about essentially the summary of my 40 years, which is sort of been what precipitated this with this little book that I know that Pete's kindly distributed to you all. But the point for me that I want to share today is two things. I'm going to try not to bore you with my passion in applied integrative neuroscience and the international database along those lines that I set up, which are sort of is the well from which I draw, and all of my network and the community. It's not about me. Some of the founders of modern day neuroscience were so magnanimous in the way they shared their wisdoms with me because of the standardized international database that I happen to have set up. And I'm this isn't the pay it forward moment. It's hopefully all of it's been paying it forward, but there's two thoughts that I want to share with you all today, if you take away nothing else. And that is the criticality of emotions. And I know we kind of intuitively know that, but I want to share with you, Pete, in the first couple of minutes, why this has been the fulcrum of the deepest insight for me as this privileged position on the landscape of the human brain, mind and soul. For me, it's primarily about the brain. And so I want to start off by just sort of talking about the context of the two things, emotion and why, when it comes to doing, the criticality of having a plan. I know it sounds obvious. Nobody would make a business decision without a plan. It's shocking to me how many people live their lives without a plan, including myself for most of my life. It just seemed too hard. But I hope that if nothing else, Pete, that I will share some of our learnings and journey together. We've had innumerable conversations that have hugely shaped my thinking along these lines. So it's about emotions and it's about a plan. And so the main sort of gaps that I saw over the last 30 years was the first gap was between aligning, reconciling these emotions, these intuitions we have and our rational thinking. That gap is the central chasm that diminishes all performance. And secondly, in the doing, there's so many should lists. You know, I work with the American Heart Association, the American Institute of Stress, and we're just overwhelmed now by the number of should lists. You know, well, this is the should list you should do. There's a sea of should lists out there. And we're going, enough of the should lists already. People feel like they're failing when they don't go through that should list. It's simply finding a plan of the summary of the amazing neuroscience on how to create a new habit, but doing it in a simplified way. And those are the two main things, Pete, that I want to share with you. I know we'll get involved in some other, you know, profoundly philosophical issues, and I always love them, but that is really the pay it forward that I hope to really share with you all here today. And I want to start with emotions because, you know, I happen to have set up laboratories in the early days at Westmead Hospitals. I just loved working in the Brain Dynamic Center, and people from different disciplines participated in a way that only a hospital the size of Westmead Hospital and a wonderful CEO, Bernie Amos, could have facilitated, cutting across these traditional disciplinary boundaries. And when we first saw, by measuring it, we had these $50,000 laboratories which measured the brain's electrical function and heart rate and sweat rate, and we could give the brain sort of stimuli so rapidly that you actually couldn't see them. And so we could show the brain emotions and measure the impact without people having to tell us anything. And when we first saw that image on the screen, that emotions, these cues, happen in a fifth of a second and can hijack us, I will never forget the silence in that room. And, you know, it's interesting, Pete, of all of our discussions, the hardest thing I've had, we've been way beyond our weight division in creating, you know, habit change platforms for the American Heart Association and Boeing and AARP, but emotions, people go, look, this is too hard. This is too complicated. And so my hope is that the wheel of emotion will become maybe slightly more tractable. It was to Einstein, he saw it in a heartbeat, in a nanosecond, the intuitive mind. He knew at the end of everything he did, he had the context that we have underrated this intuition, this emotion, and we've overrated rational thinking alone without being aligned to these profound intuitions. So that's really it. The first part I just want to mention is that this reconciliation of, in a fifth of a second, our brains are evaluating cues that could either be threatening or rewarding to us. And they're giving us a shortcut, a shortcut. The brain loves shortcuts. We survive on shortcuts. That's what keeps us safe. So it works brilliantly to keep us safe. But these intuitions were not necessarily designed or evolved to really think long-term. We're short-term, you know, immediate gratification, living in the moment kind of survival, which is essentially That's the essence, keeping us safe. And so the rational thinking, slower, more conscious, more deliberate, is what we have an enormous bias that is primarily driving our behaviors. But the reality we see as applied integrative neuroscientists is that those two processes, our emotions, our intuitions, and a lot of biases that come with them, are massively driving and interplaying with our rational thinking. And so that extends to stress. When we have these emotions, these rapid fifth of a second, 1/5 of 1 second, determining, is this threatening? Are these cues threatening? Are they rewarding? It could be physical cues. They could be a smile where the person doesn't have crinkling in the corner of their eyes, but smiles with their mouth, which means insincerity. Is body language. This huge number of cues, voice frequency. Is it threatening socially, or is it rewarding? Can we approach it? And so emotions are driving our stress response and the emotion relaxation, in the relaxation response. So my point to end up on is this. We do so well by sort of conceptually understanding that there's this emotion, non-conscious, driving, happening to us, threat, reward, that is shaping all of our thinking, our stress, our decision-making. But where are we putting our effort? When we come to regulate ourselves, when you look at the mountains of should lists and theories out there, where is the focus? The focus is where we feel it's simple. If we take, for example, stress, which is happening we can feel our heartbeat, our sweating at about half a second. We can feel that stress in our body. We can feel in parallel the decision making. Is it working? Is it rational? But that's where the effort goes. In the stress, in the feelings, in the middle category, mindfulness meditation, biofeedback, neurofeedback, wonderful tools, gratitude. These are wonderful exercises, states of mind, pillars of health. All these pillars of health, of calm, move, eat, connect, wonderful. And then we go to decision making, all the efforts of cognitive behavior therapy and these challenging our confirmation bias and reframing and contextualizing our thinking so that we do not get hijacked by these kind of thinking traps. But it turns out that the real action is happening in the fifth of a second. It's in the moment. We are looking, because it's slightly more complicated, in the wrong time zone. And that essentially is my takeaway, that it's in a second that we really are best placed to deploy a plan, what I call brain emotion awareness mastery, whereby we firstly get to know, knowing to doing, what are our triggers? What are our strengths? What are the thresholds? The threshold where your demands are greater than your capacity to deal with it. Where's your threshold where you're going to be much more likely to be triggered into a fight-flight reactive state rather than a calm and flexible one? So the presence that one needs, and of course presence is a bandied about word, but it's very powerful in its biological context, to show up in the moment where you are less likely to trigger your threshold of fight-flight reactivity with limited decision-making and with a completely different physiology than when you're in a calm, flexible, positive attitude, present state. And then lastly, having a detailed plan of how to circuit break your reactive moments, how to reframe your decision-making, and how to avoid the hijacks, whether it's decision-making hijacks where you're limited in your thinking and fight, or whether you've got an addiction and you don't want to activate what I call the runaway train. Once you have activated a craving, The runaway train once that leaves the station, I know for myself, in my addictions, once that's left the station, it's over. You can't stop a runaway train. All the effort is in that early time zone. So that's the knowing, Pete. And then, of course, the doing is the main part. So I'll end off with just a 2-minute little summary of, okay, so what do you do? Like, why is planning so hard? What's the problem? It's because there's so much information that has been poorly distilled. And if you don't like my distillation, find one that you do. Find what works for you. So that's what I'm going to end off in my first few minutes, Pete, is just a little summary of, okay, so how do we take any habit, but particularly anything that can put us in the moment to deal more effectively with our emotion hijacks, anything. And how do we do that in a systematic way?
Doing new habits. The biggest gap in generating any new habit is between knowing and doing. That gap can be traversed with a plan. If you fail to plan, you are planning to fail. Ben Franklin. The Gordon 3-step habit plan begins with step 1 is knowing your why and your readiness to change. Step 2 is training any new habit is most effective when you use existing habits as a prompt, the P. The action should be small steps, and you should self-reward at the end of any training. Step 3 is transfer. Measure what works for you and magnify it in your daily life. It is important to have one main PAR, prompt action reward, in a 30-day challenge that is not negotiable, that you do irrespective. It is amazing how small steps can have big effects. Nudge the small steps daily in multiple ways, via emails, short videos, or text. And most critically, if you don't measure it, you cannot manage it. So the daily tracking of what you do when you do it is going to be a great form of contagion in generating the habit success. You can wire any new habit, but not without a brain-based plan. The Gordon 3-step plan brings together evidence-based details about how to know, train, and transfer any new habit into your daily life.